Welcome to HardScript.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. I came home to a separation agreement taped to the fridge, right next to the Target coupon she'd been saving for weeks. No conversation, no warning, just her handwriting at the bottom of the page, calling it a peaceful reset. A mature pause, space to breathe. She'd even added a smiley face, like she was signing a birthday card instead of ending a marriage. My name is Ethan Cole, 38 years old, senior IT engineer for a logistics firm outside Denver. I'm the kind of man people describe as steady, predictable. I drink the same Starbucks order every morning, drive a Toyota Camry, keep my calendar synced across 2 devices. I'm not emotional, not dramatic, and definitely not prone to panic. Which is probably why Maya, my wife, thought she could dismantle our life with a soft tone and a few bullet points. She called it space. I called it something else. I didn't say a word when I read the note. Didn't text her. Didn't ask why she'd packed half her closet into Amazon boxes and left them by the door like she was relocating between meetings. I just stood in the kitchen listening to the quiet hum of the fridge, trying to figure out when her voice had stopped sounding like home. People think the first hit in a separation is yelling, broken glass, slammed doors. For me, it was silence. The kind that tightens around your ribs, inch by inch. 2 hours after she left, my phone buzzed. A message from her. Let's keep things calm. This is healthy for both of us. She added a heart. Not for me. For herself. A digital pat on her own back. I replied with one word. Understood. That was all. No questions about where she was staying. No conversation about the friend she'd been spending too much time with. No mention of the late-night gym sessions she never came home sweaty from. I didn't need to ask. I'd already seen enough. Small changes in her patterns, shifts in her tone whenever our friend Lucas showed up. The boxer. The guy who hugged too long and laughed too loud in our living room. The guy I trusted because marriage teaches you to overlook what makes you uncomfortable. I didn't confront her. I didn't explode. I just opened my laptop, pulled up my schedules, and started adjusting my life piece by piece. If she wanted distance, I'd give her the kind she didn't plan for. Quiet, precise, and absolute. I didn't go after her. I didn't call. I didn't try to understand her version of peace. Instead, I spent that first week moving differently, like someone quietly rearranging the wiring in a house while the lights stayed on. I shifted my work hours earlier, left before sunrise with a Starbucks cup in hand, and stayed late. Not because I needed to. Because she expected me to stay predictable, reachable, orbiting her gravity even from a distance. So I stepped out of it. At home, I packed nothing dramatic. Just small things she wouldn't notice were missing. My passport, a few shirts, tech gear I cared about. I moved it all into a storage unit near a Walmart on the other side of town. Neutral ground. Quiet. No questions. I updated account passwords she'd long forgotten she had access to. Bank apps. My laptop. Cloud drives. Nothing confrontational, just quiet perimeter checks, the same way I did before a system rollout at work. On Thursday, Lucas texted. He rarely reached out directly. He always waited for Maya to create the social opening. His message said he'd heard things were in flux and wanted to make sure I was holding up. The phrasing didn't sound like him. It sounded like someone who'd rehearsed concern in a mirror. I didn't answer. That night, I saw the first real confirmation. While organizing shared folders on the home iPad, an album popped up, auto-synced from her phone. Photos from her solo gym nights. Except she wasn't solo. And it wasn't the gym. It was his boxing studio. I recognized the heavy bags and the mirrored wall. Her hair wasn't pulled back. Her clothes weren't for working out. In one photo, she was laughing in that way she hadn't laughed with me in months, her hand on his arm like she'd always belonged there. I didn't react. I didn't even save the photos. I just locked the screen and sat in silence, letting everything align in my head like code compiling cleanly after hours of debugging. She'd wanted a soft exit, a temporary stage where she could rewrite the story later, return stronger, choose me again on her terms. She thought distance was a leash. She didn't see what she'd actually done. She'd cut the last thread holding my attention in place. The next morning, I left the house before dawn, drove the car to work in complete calm, and started the next phase of what I already understood was coming. Not revenge, not negotiation, just transition. A quiet one she wouldn't hear until it was finished. The following week unfolded like a systems audit I hadn't announced to anyone. I kept my routines lean, almost silent, drifting in and out of the house as if I were syncing data in the background rather than living there. Maya expected check-ins, expected warmth, expected the version of me who always reassured her even when she was the one creating the storm. Instead, she got short replies and logistical statements. Nothing she could label as hostile. Nothing she could weaponize. Just distance with clean edges. She stopped by the house a few evenings to grab a few things. Each time, she acted surprised I wasn't home. She told a mutual friend she was starting to worry that I was shutting down emotionally. That was the moment I knew she felt the shift. Because for Maya, concern was never about love. It was about losing access. On Wednesday night, I pulled into the driveway after finishing a late deployment at work. The car headlights cut across the living room window, and inside, I saw a movement. Her, pacing with her phone in hand. She must have expected me an hour earlier. She came out onto the porch as I stepped out of the car, her voice bright but tense. She told me she'd been hoping to talk things through, that she wanted to keep the separation healthy. She used the same soft, HR-friendly phrases she'd used during our last argument, as if reframing the moment made it more digestible. I listened, calm, neutral. She waited for me to take her hand or ask where she'd been the last 2 nights. I didn't. I just walked past her, unlocked the door, and told her she could pick up what she needed. She followed me inside, filling the silence with explanations about her schedule. She said Lucas had been supportive and checking in for my sake. She said it carefully, watching my face for any crack in composure. I didn't give her one. She left with 2 small bags and a frustrated glance over her shoulder, like she couldn't figure out why her emotional cues weren't extracting the usual response. I watched her car pull out of the driveway, saw her pause at the curb, probably hoping I'd step outside, call her name, ask her to stay. I didn't move. Instead, I sat on the couch with a laptop and opened a new document, outlining tasks the way I would for a failing network that needed a clean rebuild. Not revenge, not rescue, just clarity. By the time I closed the laptop, one truth had settled fully into place. Maya thought she was guiding the separation. She didn't realize she'd already lost control of it. 2 days later, her version of peace cracked. It happened quietly, the way systems fail long before the first error message appears. I was at the office early, reviewing logs from a server migration, when my phone buzzed with a notification from the home security app. Motion detected in the hallway. It was just Maya, moving through the house like she still lived there, taking her time, opening drawers she'd once kept organized. She wasn't taking clothes. She was checking for reactions, checking for traces of me left open, waiting for her. She didn't find any. I'd started keeping my essentials in the car trunk, not out of fear, but out of design. The less she could map, the less she could influence. When she realized I wasn't coming home during her window, she sent a text saying she'd left a few items on the table for me to review when I had emotional bandwidth. It was classic Maya, mixing gentleness with condescension, threading control through the language of self-care. After work, I stopped by Walmart for a few basics. Wireless chargers, a set of small bins for the office, nothing meaningful. I walked through the aisles feeling lighter than I had in months. Not happy, not free, just unhooked from the push and pull she'd conditioned me to respond to. When I got home, the items she'd left on the table were arranged with careful precision, like a psychological trap waiting for a misstep. There were printed articles about communication during separation, a handwritten note about shared expectations, and a sealed envelope with my name written in a careful script. I didn't open any of it. I placed it all in a drawer, slid it shut, and went about my evening like she wasn't orchestrating a performance meant to pull me back into her rhythm. Later that night, I went for a drive. The streets were empty, the car humming softly beneath me, the Starbucks cup from that morning still in the console. I wasn't running from anything. I was observing, thinking, mapping. Around 10, another security alert. This time she wasn't inside. She was on the porch, pacing in small circles, waiting. Maybe she thought I'd forgotten something. Maybe she thought the sight of her under the porch light would tap into old instincts. But the only instinct I felt was distance. She left after 15 minutes. No message, no note. She didn't understand it yet, but by stepping out of her emotional field, I'd taken the only thing she ever truly relied on, my predictability. And once she lost that, everything she'd planned began to unravel quietly, thread by thread. The real break happened the following Monday, and it happened in the calmest way possible. I was at my desk before sunrise, the office empty except for the cleaners and the low hum of servers. I liked those hours, the world still asleep, no voices shaping expectations. I reviewed error logs, updated a deployment schedule, and sipped Starbucks from a paper cup that had already gone lukewarm. When Maya's name lit up my phone, I let it fade out without touching it. She tried again an hour later, then switched tactics with a text saying she wanted to synchronize schedules for the week. She phrased it like a project manager briefing, as if packaging her motives in corporate language would make them less transparent. I didn't respond. She sent a follow-up asking if we could meet at the house that evening, saying she needed clarity before making long-term decisions. Still nothing from me. At lunch, I drove to a quiet parking lot behind a Walmart, the same one where my storage unit sat tucked between rows of metal doors. I opened the trunk, reorganized a few things inside, shirts, backup drives, an old hoodie, and closed it again. No panic, no rush, just intent. Space was becoming a currency, and I was controlling its flow. By evening, the unanswered calls had grown from concern to urgency. I pulled into the driveway, killed the engine, and sat for a minute in the stillness. When I stepped inside, she was there, standing in the kitchen like the last few weeks had never happened. She wasn't smiling, and she wasn't crying. She looked unsettled, like someone who'd bet on a predictable result and lost the wager completely. She said she'd been waiting. She said she didn't like how distant things felt. She said Lucas was just a friend, but the words landed without conviction, like she understood I no longer needed proof. I didn't ask for explanations. I didn't offer accusations. I just told her I had work to finish and walked past her. That silence did more damage than anger ever could. I saw her shoulders tighten as she processed it. The absence of my attempt to salvage anything. The absence of the man who always met her halfway. She left 15 minutes later. No dramatic exit. No final speech. Just a soft click of the door closing behind her, followed by a long pause on the porch before she finally walked to her car. It was the first moment she realized the separation she'd engineered so carefully was no longer hers to steer. And judging by the way she lingered by the mailbox, staring back at the house like it was slipping away from her, she felt that shift in her bones. 2 weeks into her peaceful separation, Maya finally broke her own script. It happened on a Thursday evening, just after I'd finished a remote deployment and was closing my laptop. I'd spent the day in the quiet zone of the office, the air conditioning running steady above me, the familiar smell of burnt coffee drifting from the break room. A coworker had left a box of donuts from Walmart on the table, and I remember thinking how ordinary the day felt, steady, predictable, mine. When I pulled into the driveway that night, her car was already parked at the curb. Not in the driveway. The curb. A distance marker. A subtle plea. She was sitting on the porch steps, elbows on her knees like she'd been waiting long enough to lose whatever speech she'd prepared. I walked past her with a nod. No hostility. No welcome. Just acknowledgement. Inside, she followed me, her voice low, saying she felt like I was slipping away faster than she expected. She said she didn't want to lose the good parts of what we were. She said separation wasn't supposed to feel like this, cold, mechanical, unbalanced. She said she didn't understand why everything felt final when it was meant to be temporary. I listened, leaned against the counter, calm as a quiet server room at midnight. Her eyes searched my face for anything familiar, anything she could still control. But she wasn't talking to the same man she'd left a note for on the fridge. She said Lucas had been checking in because he was worried about both of us. She said he'd only been offering support. She said I'd misinterpreted their closeness. She said a lot, but each sentence sounded like a backup file of a story she'd told herself for weeks. I didn't challenge her. I didn't bring up the photos. I didn't mention the late nights or the gym excuses. Silence is often a better mirror than questions. The longer I stayed quiet, the more she filled the space with explanations that contradicted each other. After 10 minutes, her shoulders sagged, like she suddenly realized she was negotiating against the absence of emotion. When she paused, waiting for me to rescue her narrative, I simply told her I had work in the morning. She stared at me as if I'd spoken in a language she never learned. After she left, I stood by the window and watched her linger by her car again. She touched the door handle, then stepped back, then forward, then back again. A glitch in her emotional programming. For the first time, she understood the truth she'd tried to avoid. I wasn't waiting for her anymore. The shift became undeniable the night I saw them together. Not in some dramatic, movie-style reveal, but in a quiet, accidental moment that confirmed everything I already knew. It was a Saturday evening, and I'd stopped by Walmart to pick up a few things for the week: protein bars, cleaning wipes, backup phone cables. Simple items. I moved through the aisles with the same measured calm that had carried me through the last month. No racing thoughts. No what-ifs. Just presence. Driving home, I passed the small commercial strip near the gym where Lucas worked. The parking lot was mostly empty, the neon sign casting a faint blue glow over the sidewalk. I wouldn't have noticed anything if I hadn't caught a silhouette at the far end. Two figures standing close, too close, under the shadow of the awning. Maya. And Lucas. Her head tilted up toward him, his posture leaned in, their hands briefly touching before she stepped back like she'd realized someone might see. It wasn't the kind of touch meant to hide affection. It was the kind meant to test a boundary they'd already crossed. I didn't slow down. I didn't circle back. I didn't take a picture. I kept driving until I pulled into our driveway, turned off the engine, and sat in the silence. My hands didn't shake. My chest didn't ache. What I felt wasn't heartbreak or rage. It was confirmation. A clean, quiet click in the mind, like code running exactly as predicted. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. Maya said she hoped we could talk Sunday, that she wanted to rebuild a healthier connection as we navigate this transition. Her phrasing had become more polished the more she lost control. I answered with the same words she'd used the day she walked out: understood. The next morning, I made breakfast, cleaned the kitchen, and reorganized a few folders on my laptop. I took the car for a long drive, Starbucks in the cup holder, the road wide open. It was the kind of morning that used to belong to us. Errands, shared coffee, quiet comfort. Now it felt like mine alone, and strangely, that didn't feel like loss. By the time she arrived at the house, I was sitting on the porch, relaxed, unbothered. She seemed thrown off by that. She searched my face for evidence of pain, jealousy, something she could work with. But I didn't give her a single foothold, and that unsettled her more than any confrontation could have. She wasn't used to a version of me that no longer revolved around her. Not yet, but she was beginning to see it. She walked toward the porch with that careful, measured expression she used at work during tense HR meetings. Soft eyes, slow breaths, the performance of calm. She said she appreciated me making time. She said she wanted to reset expectations. She said we should try to reconnect intentionally. She kept talking like she was trying to guide a training seminar, not repair a marriage. I let her speak. Silence is a pressure point people don't expect until it's already working. She sat down beside me, leaving a polite gap between us, like she wasn't sure which version of me she'd find. Her hands moved restlessly in her lap, twisting the strap of her purse like a nervous tell she didn't know she had. She said she felt like the separation was becoming something darker. She said my distance scared her. She said she missed how predictable things used to be. Hearing that word, predictable, was the closest I'd come to an emotional reaction in weeks. Not anger, just clarity. Predictability was never about stability for her. It was about control, knowing exactly where I'd be, when I'd respond, how I'd soothe whatever conflict she engineered. She tried a different angle then, asking if I'd been seeing anyone. The question came wrapped in faux curiosity, but her shoulders dipped slightly when she said it, like she was bracing for a hit. I told her calmly that I'd been working, adjusting, focusing on my own life. Nothing more. She didn't believe me. I could see that immediately, and the disbelief wasn't about me. It was about her losing confidence in her ability to read me. That was new territory for her. For a moment, she looked out over the yard and said she felt like she was on the outside of her own life, watching it move without her. She said she never expected the separation to create real distance. She said she thought it would give us perspective and bring us back stronger. She didn't realize she was describing her plan out loud. When she finally looked at me, really looked, there was a flicker of fear in her eyes. Fear of losing her influence. Fear of losing her positioning. fear of losing the version of me who always met her halfway, even when she walked out first. She asked if I wanted to try again, if we could rebuild intentionally. She waited for me to follow her lead. I didn't answer right away. I let the quiet stretch long enough for her to feel the imbalance she'd created for months. When I finally told her we could continue the discussion another time, her face fell, just slightly, barely noticeable unless you knew her tells. I stood up, walked inside, and closed the door softly behind me. Not a slam, not a rejection, just a quiet boundary she couldn't step over anymore. The next major shift came quietly, the way most structural failures do. No loud crash, just a subtle change in weight that eventually breaks everything underneath. It happened on a Tuesday evening after work. I'd stopped by Target for a new set of office notebooks, walked the aisles with the same steady pace I brought to everything now, then drove home with the windows cracked just enough to let in the early spring air. Nothing deliberate, nothing emotional, just movement. When I pulled into the driveway, Maya's car was already parked at the curb again. She was standing beside it, arms crossed, posture tight in a way that told me she wasn't here to talk. She was here to reclaim ground. She followed me to the porch, asking if we could continue the conversation from the weekend. I told her I had things to finish. It wasn't dismissal. It wasn't cruelty. It was simply the truth. Inside, she lingered like she expected me to ask her to stay. When I didn't, she asked if I'd be around later. I told her my schedule was full. That phrase landed harder than I expected. Her expression flickered, the smallest crack, a brief static in her emotional signal. After she left, I sat on the couch, reviewing system notes for an upcoming migration, letting the quiet settle. Around 9, my phone buzzed with a message from Lauren, one of Maya's closest friends. We'd known each other for years through birthdays, dinners, weekend barbecues. She said she'd heard I'd lost weight during the separation and asked if I wanted to join her for a late walk near the river trail. I almost declined out of habit, but something in the tone felt simple, grounded. No emotional hooks, just concern without ulterior motives. I said I could meet her. We walked under the streetlights beside the water, moving slow, talking about nothing that mattered. Work annoyances, neighborhood gossip, the early spring weather. Lauren mentioned she hadn't seen much of Maya lately, that things felt complicated on her end. I kept my responses short, steady. I wasn't looking for comfort. I wasn't looking for anything. Just space that wasn't loaded with Maya's expectations. Halfway down the trail, she brushed my arm lightly as a cyclist sped past, a reflexive gesture. I didn't think anything of it, but she hesitated afterward, unsure if she'd crossed a line. I told her she hadn't. Her shoulders relaxed. We kept walking. Near the end of the trail, the wind picked up, and she wrapped her arms around herself. I offered my hand without thinking, steadying her as we stepped over a slick patch of pavement. It was instinct, not intention. She took it. For a moment, it was just two people walking, nothing charged, nothing dramatic. But peace was a fragile thing, and Maya chose that exact moment to step out of the shadows near the parking lot, her eyes locking onto our hands in the dim light. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Maya froze in the glow of the parking lot lights, her posture rigid, her breath shallow enough that even from a distance I could see the rise of her shoulders stall mid-inhale. Lauren dropped my hand immediately, but the damage was already done. Not because we'd done anything wrong, but because the illusion Maya depended on, her image of being in control of the narrative, fractured right there on the pavement. She stepped closer, slow and deliberate, as if each foot hitting the ground was an argument she hadn't prepared for. Her eyes weren't angry. They were startled, unstable, like someone who'd been walking across a familiar bridge and suddenly found it gone beneath her feet. She asked what was happening, but she said it in the third person, like she was talking through a glass wall. Lauren answered before I could, her voice calm, saying she'd invited me for a walk, nothing more. Maya barely looked at her. She kept her focus on me, trying to pull responses out of my silence the way she always had. But I didn't step toward her. I didn't reach for her. I didn't justify anything. When she realized I wasn't going to, her tone shifted. She said she thought we were rebuilding. She said this separation had a purpose. She said she needed to know if she'd made a mistake. She said a lot in those few seconds, words that would have once pulled me right back into her orbit. But I'd already stepped out of it weeks ago. Lauren excused herself and walked toward her car, giving us space. Maya watched her leave, then turned back to me, eyes sharp, breath shaking. She said she didn't understand how things had flipped so quickly. She said she felt like she was losing everything at once. She said she thought she'd have time. That last line told the truth she'd been avoiding. I told her quietly that she got the separation she asked for. Nothing more, nothing less. She waited for me to soften. I didn't. Not out of spite, but because something fundamental in me had simply gone still. She stepped back, realizing there was nothing to negotiate with anymore. Nothing to salvage on her terms. When she finally walked away, the air felt strangely clear, like someone had turned off a machine that had been humming in the background for years. Driving home, the road empty, Starbucks cup in the console, I felt no triumph. No heat, just a steady, grounded calm. Some people fight for closure. Some simply walk into it, quietly, on their own terms. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.